All right. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody, on a Friday afternoon, possibly before your spring break. What a way to enter that. You're here for the Building an Integrated System for Student Wellness webinar. This is going to be an exploration today of the Interconnected Systems Framework, particularly for any work that you might be doing as a BHSSA grantee. Thanks for adding your name, title, organization, grantee number in the chat. We're going to just do a little broad overview of who's in the room. So I know some people are connected to counties that have grants, but you may not yourself be a grantee. So we'll just give a little background. There's a lot of different BHSSA grants. Phases 1 and 2 started in 2020 and then in 2022. If your county or your team is a BHSSA phase 1 or 2 grantee, would you please add a reaction heart emoji, please, so we can kind of see how many rounds 1 and 2 we have. Okay, thank you. All right, and then phase 3 was the next phase that started between 2020 and goes through 2026. So if your county is a phase 3 grantee, would you please add the party emoji? Okay, all right. It's a solo party right now. And then phase 4, the newest phase, lots of different categories for this one: at promise youth, universal screening, sustainability, and other priorities. If your county or your team is part of a phase 4 grant, will you please add the applause reaction? All right. Okay, thank you. So as you can see, lots of different bodies of work. You may be doing a lot of different types of projects that we really think that ISF could be a good fit for whatever team you're working on. And then who is presenting this today? How are we involved in this? After all of these grantees started, the Commission for Behavioral Health added a technical coaching team that was created with grantees who have had BHSSA grants before, and they provide technical assistance to the grantee partnerships across the state. And then the TCT, the counties who are part of that are Tehama, Placer, who will be with you today, and then Imperial County. And we have different specific topics that we support. And then the TCT is supported by STAC, the statewide coordinator who oversees that TCT work. So we're very grateful for our partnership with STAC. Nikki is here today helping us put on this webinar. So thank you, Nikki. And we'll go ahead and get started. Christina and I are from Placer County. We support the TCT with program implementation. And my name is Allie Murphy, and I'm the Director of Mental Health in our Prevention Supports and Services Department here. And I'll let Christina introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christina Trentz, also a coordinator in Prevention Supports and Services here at Placer County Office of Education. I'm so glad you all are here today.
Okay. So here are our goals for today. We're hoping to help you understand the purpose and core features of the Interconnected Systems Framework, specifically for student behavioral health, recognize the connections between ISF and your BHSSA projects, how to implement them, improve and sustain them, reflect on your current level of alignment and readiness for deeper implementation, and then identify some actionable next steps and available supports to strengthen local implementation. So this is really designed to orient you to ISF and then help you kind of see where you might be on the pathway and what you might want a next step to be. There's lots of entry points to this work, and we're hoping that something resonates with you. So you may have attended the BHSSA quarterly collaboration call back in June of 2025, so almost a year ago now, where we did a little intro on ISF and how it can support BHSSA grantees. This webinar today will be very similar to the work we did there, but also in the hub for BHSSA grantees, there is a peer perspective paper that talks all about ISF, and if you have colleagues who couldn't come today, you're welcome to share the recording with them once it comes out, but also this peer perspective would also be a great resource to share. Okay, so we're going to start out with the context and needs for this work. A lot of this is going to be stuff that I think everybody in this room knows, has shared. You might have your own slides on this, but you also might be working with team members who aren't quite sure why you might need this work, and you might be looking for some resources to share, hey, here's why I think we should do this. And so we want to offer this today as you go back and talk with your teams. So we know the challenges in the school include habitual and disproportionate use of exclusionary discipline practices, with the consistent use of referrals to more restrictive settings and poor outcomes for youth with disabilities, as well as a high rate of undiagnosed mental health problems and needs. There's usually a lack of tier 1 and tier 2 mental health interventions, and there's usually a referral to a mental health person who apparently works some magic and, quote, fixes kids, and that is viewed as the intervention. There's often limited staffing and resources to put towards the current high level of mental health needs, and then initiative fatigue for the adults who are being asked to implement these things. Schools have responded to increased mental health needs by contracting with outside community-based agencies for mental health services and hiring mental health experts to deliver specific supports in isolation without generalizing those to the classroom or recess or things like that. Buying social emotional curriculums that may or may not be evidence-based, and then training teachers on SEL and trauma-informed practices, sort of one and done trainings, rather than, again, some sort of generalization of that new learning. So these current responses, there's some great bits in here, but without redesigning a system, these are not going to be enough to meet the current needs that we're seeing at our schools. They lead to fragmented systems. There's siloed initiatives. This team does this team does that. Parallel teaming, access inequities for students, and practice program intervention misalignment. So how can we use ISF to support BHSSA projects? This can support you in aligning multiple projects efficiently. So you may be working on a lot of different things to support the youth mental health needs in your community, and ISF can help you get all those fragmented systems together to develop a shared vision, create collaborative problem solving, and focus on a diverse leadership team that guides the work with clarity. Similar values and processes to other common initiatives such as PBIS or community schools, so things that you might already be doing. All right, so what is the Interconnected Systems Framework? Christina's going to tell us all about it.
All right, so let's learn about what this thing is. I'm going to start by throwing some acronyms at you. Nothing better than an acronym soup for your afternoon lunch here, but I promise I'm going to break them up to help you understand. So starting with the Interconnected Systems Framework, which we might be referring to as ISF throughout the remainder of this webinar together. So what is that? So ISF involves the intentional integration of all social, emotional, and behavioral, SEB, interventions within the multi-tiered system of supports, MTSS, framework, including integrated teams, systems, and evidence-based practices that are delivered based on student and community needs and presenting data. So essentially what this means is that the Interconnected Systems Framework is a process. It's a process for de-siloing our systems, integrating the work that we're doing, whether that be your buckets of work at district school sites, whether it be between the programs that exist within your county organization. ISF offers that process to bring those systems together intentionally through teaming and through shared data analysis and decision making. And we're going to show you some examples of how to accomplish that work and what it looks like. So some key messages through the Interconnected Systems Framework. First and foremost, we're looking towards combining our teams for efficiency. We want to create that single system of delivery rather than having separate systems that are operating in silos. Another key feature is that access is not enough. Ali had referenced that sometimes we have those humans that come onto our school campuses or that are charged with supporting all of the student mental health needs or behavioral needs. We want to move away from that referral handoff type of system where we are not just tasking one person with this work and we're moving beyond access. It's not just about the magic that happens in that counseling room. We want everyone to be aware of the interventions that are being offered to our students so that we can intentionally generalize those interventions and create the next key point, that mental health is actually for all. It's not just the responsibility of one human in our organizations that might have some special letters behind their name or certifications, but truly mental health is the responsibility of all of us, and we all play a role in that. And we also want to be considering the mental health and wellness of not just our students, but our staff and our community as a whole, and be intentionally looking at the data that tells us how is our mental health and well-being doing in our community. And finally, that MTSS is essential. So MTSS is that essential organizing structure through which all of our evidence-based tiered interventions flow through into one holistic system. So here's an example of what this integration, interconnection process can look like. And these buckets on the screen, you see a bucket of social emotional learning work that's happening, mental health, and PBIS. Your buckets for your organization or your school community might look different. You might be having PBIS and community schools and academics are your primary lenses that you're looking through, but this is an example of what this can look like. So we want to move away from this model where our systems are siloed. So you might have a mental health team on your campus, maybe operating through BHSSA, that is doing great work, and it's multi-tiered work, right? They've established their own systems. They might have their own referral pathways. They're doing some good things. But then you have a separate PBIS team that is also rocking and rolling, operating through the tiers. And PBIS is really skilled at using data, both fidelity and outcome data, to really make informed decisions about the work that they're doing. A problem is that these two teams are not communicating. And so the work that we're doing also to both support student health and well-being, we're using different languages, we're not looking at common data sources, and this can create duplication. This can create the missing of children, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, but it causes really inefficient systems. So we want to move away from this siloed model to one integrated system. So we're looking to create this integration still through MTSS because that is our organizing structure, but now we are focusing on aligning all of our practices across our buckets of work. We're creating common language. For example, at Tier 1, if we have our PBIS expectations, we are now embedding the language from our social emotional learning curriculum on our campuses within those PBIS expectations, which is really doing a service to our students to help them understand that we are all using a common language and we were building as we move through those tiers. So it's not something different. We are operating in one holistic system. This also helps bring our teams together. So now we're all looking at the same types of data to make those decisions about when students need something more or something different. And we are now learning how to do that well. So maybe now our PBIS team has taught our mental health and our SEL teams how to use fidelity and outcome data to make those tiered decisions. So again, now we're still operating through MTSS, but now we've integrated into one holistic system. So where did this come from, the interconnected systems framework? So way back in the early aughts, when I was rocking some low-cut jeans and probably listening to Avril Lavigne, some very intelligent humans from the National TA Center for PBIS realized that we were missing kids. So we had some wonderful systems and practices happening through PBIS, but we were not capturing those kids that were really struggling with mental health and specifically with internalizing needs. We had school-based mental health systems happening on campus. We had PBIS systems happening on campus, but they weren't talking to each other. And that's where we begin to see kids falling through the cracks. So they came together to raise awareness around this and begin to develop a process of how we could interconnect our school-based mental health systems and our PBIS systems. That's what resulted in this first monograph that you see on the left-hand side, Advancing Education Effectiveness. And from there, they realized, okay, now we actually need to itemize out those steps. How do we actually install this? How do we bring this work to life? And that's what brought forth what you see here on the right-hand side, the Interconnected Systems Framework 2020 guide, which is the implementation guide. That really charts out the set of steps that are learnable and doable, both at the district implementation level and the school site implementation level. So that you know this isn't a bunch of hooey, there has been some research behind this work as well. So there was a randomized controlled trial conducted, and it looked at schools that were implementing PBIS alone, PBIS and school-based mental health systems separately, still in that siloed model, and then school sites that were implementing using the interconnected systems framework, such that they had interconnected their PBIS and school-based mental health systems. And the results were pretty positive, I'll say, and also reflective of what we've seen in our work through ISF as well. So some of those outcomes including increased staff collaboration and role clarity. So truly the teachers, administrators, mental health staff reported better team functioning overall and a true understanding between school-based and community mental health providers. So if you had community mental health providers that were coming onto your school campuses, now they felt like we were a part of that system. We really understand what's happening and we're all working together. They also saw better behavioral outcomes. So consistent with what we've seen in PBIS, but even more so, we saw improvements in behavioral indicators and fewer suspensions and discipline referrals. They also saw stronger Tier 2 intervention fidelity. To me, this is a big one because Tier 2 is typically where we're lacking the most, or we have ineffective interventions that might be happening, unclear interventions, or those interventions that seem to go on forever and ever and kids never exit from. So that was a really big highlight for me that we saw that. And like I said, in our schools that are doing this work, we've seen similar outcomes. But most importantly to me is that we saw improved access to mental health services overall and a reduction in the internalizing symptoms of students. So that tells me we were really effective in capturing those students that had those internalizing behaviors and really strengthening our school-based mental health systems through this process. And I want to share that we were given a gift here at Placer County Office of Education. So we were able to work with some of the creators, the gurus behind the Interconnected Systems Framework, Susan Barrett and Kimberly Yannick. So they guided us through a book study, essentially, of these guides so that we could work together to create something that is teachable, trainable, learnable, and doable to bring it to life for our local community. And that's exactly what we did. And we created a scope and sequence that we could train others in how to do this work and how to install these activities. So I'm going to take you on a little walk through this installation roadmap. And as I go, you're going to see some stars pop up on the screen as I go bubble by bubble. And as you're listening to this little roadmap walk, I want you to be thinking about which activities are really speaking to the work that you're currently doing. It might be that you have some of these pieces in place, but that we really need to work on a couple of these aspects to take ourselves to the next level or to interconnect our systems. So hone in on some of the activities as I describe them and be thinking about what are the strengths of my current work and really what are the needs? What do I really need some support in working towards? All right. So to start right there on the left-hand side, we start by exploring it, just like you're doing right now. We're learning about the Interconnected Systems Framework. We're thinking about, is this a fit for my organization or the schools and districts that I work with? And what we realized is that the very first thing that we need to do is bring together that leadership team, our integrated leadership team, which on school campuses we tend to refer to as the district community leadership team, which Ali will be telling you more about in a few slides. But this is an essential team that operates at the systems level, that is inclusive of many of our support providers, the voices of our executive leadership, and our community members. So it's very important that we gather all of these decision makers and all of the people that hold the knowledge of the different lenses of the work that we do together to engage in these installation activities. So that's key feature number one, form your team. And next, we engage in a type of baseline assessment. So how do we know the current state of affairs? How are we doing? How interconnected or siloed are we right now? What do we really need to work towards? And for this work, we have leaned into the district systems fidelity inventory. And if you're familiar with the TFI, the tiered fidelity inventory, give me a little thumbs up emoji. Show me that you know what I'm talking about for the TFI. Maybe. I see some thumbs up. Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, so did you know that there's a district version of this? So the district systems fidelity inventory. So you can actually assess your district systems level, more of the leadership level through this baseline assessment. And it's very well aligned to the activities that we do in the Interconnected Systems Framework. So that was our baseline, and then we move towards those installation activities. So in order to know where we want to go, we have to know what do we currently have in place. And that's where we need to evaluate what are the interventions, resources, what is the data, what are the needs of our school community, and who are the people that we have to serve those needs. So the top activities there involve creating an intervention inventory that's quite comprehensive, but really laying our cards on the table. What do we currently have available to support student needs? What do our interventions look like across programs? And what does our data tell us? What data points do we have access to and look at on a regular basis? And not just our school or district data, but also our community data. What does our community say are the needs of our, oh, sorry, Kirk says unstable internet connections. Okay, no worries. Thank you, Kirk. I thought maybe it was me, so I wanted to check on that. And so what does our data tell us? And then who are the people that are currently in place to serve those needs? So really that is an assessment of what we currently have, our reality. And the next step is then to look at the gaps. So we engage in a gap analysis and begin to map out what do we need to create to fill those gaps. Another essential piece of this work is changing the way our referral flow, okay? So oftentimes what creates silos is separate referral pathways, which we'll talk more about too. But a key activity here is that we want to create a universal request for assistance. So instead of having separate referral pathways, we want everything to flow through one request for assistance process to one integrated team. And I have to say that's a true game changer for most of the teams that have done this work. This really helps to de-silo our systems. Thank you, Allie, for the clap there. Yes. And explore additional partnerships, fundings, and MOUs to fill those gaps and needs. So sometimes once we do our intervention inventories, we have a quick realization that we don't have everything that we need to fill those gaps. So we need to be able to fill them somehow, either through new interventions and the adoption of, or by considering new partnerships. And finally, our universal screening exploration. So there's a reason that this is a part of our roadmap here, and there's a reason that this is last. So as I've been talking through some of these features, you probably are hearing that in order to implement a universal screener, we need to have some things in place first. So we need to know what interventions we have available. We need to have effective and efficient teams that are going to be looking at the data that is going to be brought forth through a universal screener and be able to respond to those needs. So although universal screening is very, very important and a wonderful way to capture early on what the needs of our students are, we want to have these other systems features in place first. So that was a part of our roadmap that we offer if that's something that you're looking towards as well. And finally, engaging in that continuous improvement cycle once you put these things in place. So once your teams are established, you have all of these tools and systems and processes in place, we're going to continue to use them in this continuous improvement cycle. That was a lot for a roadmap, but there's a reason I walked you through that, because I wanted you to envision where are your strengths, where are your needs in this work. And I'm going to give you another visual way to think about these installation activities. So here's in list form, the installation activities that are involved through the interconnected systems framework process. And I'm going to give you a minute just to read through those. And then Allie's going to drop in the chat a question for you all, asking what is a strength of your work when you look at this list of activities and what is an area of need. And it might be that you feel like, I'm doing awesome. I have all of these things in place, and it's okay to say that. It's also okay to say, I have none of these things in place, and they're all areas of need. That's okay too. Okay. All right. A strength integrated teams. Love it, Lindsay. Love it. And a growth staff roles and capacity. Absolutely. That's a tricky one. And we actually worked on developing a calculation, a way to actually determine what is the capacity of our staff based on interventions. And that's been truly helpful for making those data informed decisions. When do we know we need more? And what does that look like? All right. Give just another
Christina,
second. Yeah.
do you mind pointing out a couple that you see in your work with districts that are most commonly the couple that are like, ooh, we really need that?
Yes. So I think most definitely, like I commented on before, that universal request for assistance process, sometimes teams think that they already have that in place, but it might only be looking at one fractured subset of student needs, or it still might be leading to fractured teams. So that's something will hone in on a little bit more, but that universal request for assistance process and also that intervention inventory, really laying all of our cards on the table. So what are we actually doing? Is it evidence-based? Do we have fidelity measures around those things that we're doing? All right. Keep us moving. Okay. So to see what this work has looked like in action, we've had a lot of experience now with our interconnected systems framework installation work. And as Ali was sharing before, so we are longtime BHSSA grantees, and through that opportunity, there have been 7 wellness center sites that we've had the gift of implementing throughout Placer County. And those started with some strong guiding principles through PBIS and MTSS. However, not knowing what we know now, and hindsight is always 2020, that those programs were implemented a bit in silos and not in truly interconnected forms with all of the other amazing work happening on the school campuses where our staff was embedded. We also are involved in universal screening work through BHSSA. And as we talked about before, the essential features of ISF are very much aligned with readiness for universal screening. So through that lens, what we wanted to do is start with many of our sites that have wellness centers throughout Placer County and focus on interconnecting our school-based mental health systems with our PBIS and, in most cases, the academic systems happening on campuses. So we had 4 sites that we started to do this work with. It's Colfax, Loomis, Western Placer Unified School District, and our early childhood education department have moved through this interconnected systems framework process with us, formed their integrated teams, and walked through these activities. And most excitingly, we now have a cohort of 4 more local school districts also going through this process with us this year. And we've also focused on beginning to expand into our region, and Esparto Unified School District, in partnership with Yolo County Office of Education, are also engaged in this work. And now through this opportunity through BHSSA as technical coaching teams, we have the opportunity to engage even more statewide partners in this work, share our learnings, and even work towards a trainer of trainers opportunity that we will talk about more at the end of our webinar. Now, Ali is going to give us some examples of this work in action.
Okay, so if you're thinking about all of this and not really sure what it might look like on the day-to-day, we're going to try to connect some dots here. Christina shared earlier this slide that showed that a lot of districts, schools, counties, even your grantee leadership teams, you may be working in these silos of we have a team that meets on SEL, a team that meets on mental health, a team that meets on PBIS. And as she shared, we really want to move from this to the model where all these teams are working together. So there might be one tier 1 team that talks about all of these things, one tier 2 and tier 3 team that talks about all of these things. And that's a lot. I just moved a slide very quickly, but that takes a lot of effort to make these things happen. And that's really what ISF can support. So we're going to take a look at how that actually happens. As Christina shared, there is a district community leadership team that's formed when you do this ISF work, and whether that's a team that's started at your county, if that's who holds your BHSSA grant, or it's with your COE or a district, any of those groups can form a district community leadership team. That team is driving the decisions that are going to affect what's happening at the teaming at your site levels. So you may already have a tier 1 team at your school, or a tier 2 or tier 3 team, but those teams might be siloed, or they might not have this feedback loop with a district community leadership team. And that's the piece that really comes together with ISF. So I put this little screenshot here of those silos broken down with that triangle to show that this is what the integrated system looks like. It looks like these teams meeting, communication happening, and then a continuum of practices and interventions happening on the school campuses using data because of the decisions that are made in the DCLT with data about the school community. And we're going to talk a little bit about how that's done today. Okay, so these are the core members of a district community leadership team. It doesn't mean you have to have every single one of these people, and it doesn't mean that you can't have other members, but this is kind of a general representation. You want to have some district executive leader, for example, an assistant superintendent, some kind of project coordinator, perhaps a PBIS coordinator or coach, a behavioral health agency leader, a school-based behavioral health coordinator, a site administrator, a community member, and an administrator from other child-serving agencies. So perhaps the executive director of a community-based organization that you work with. All of these members come together to create that DCLT. And Christina is going to drop in the chat a question about, now that you're looking at this, on a scale of 0 to 5, 0 being not at all and 5 being we've got this, how would you rate the strength of your current tiered teaming structure? So you can think about this slide here and also the slide that we were just on. How are you feeling about these tiered teaming structures for your BHSSA project or the county or district or COE that you're in? So you can just drop a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 in the chat. Okay, thank you, Leslie. And Lindsay, thank you. Haley, great, thanks.
Something that we like to say is that zeros are O's for opportunities. So thank you for sharing that.
Tell me you're a mental health clinician and a school counselor without telling me you're one. That was very strengths-based, Christina. I loved it. You know, I also wonder, I think for me, if someone would have asked me that a few years ago, I might have said a higher number, but then seeing these slides or hearing about this, you realize like, oh, I actually don't have that. It feels like it's systematic and integrated in my head. And then when I see the definition of that, I'm realizing it's actually a lower number than I realized. So maybe that's happening for you. I see a few head nods. So you're not alone. Okay, so responsibilities of the DCLT. Their goals are to create a shared vision for aligned system and align academics, behavior, mental health, and wellness. That team looks at everything. And they set non-negotiable implementation expectations across sites. They use evidence-based practices, empower teams to use data for decisions, build capacity through coaching and professional development, monitor fidelity and outcomes, and maintain strong two-way communication. And I don't know about you, but if you've worked at a site before, sometimes it can be really hard to get something going or to keep the fidelity of something when you don't feel like the leadership understands that or is also pushing that. So having the DCLT really also helps you at the site level when you're trying to implement something, and you know it's a decision that's being made by the district team with representation from mental health, from the community, from school admin, that all of those people have made that agreement together. Okay. So here are the DCLT responsibilities that we just looked at. And then here is what does that practically look like? What are the installation activities that we're doing? And I don't know about you, but I really like this slide for the practicality purpose of I want to know when we're bringing people together, when we're sitting in a room, what are we actually doing? And so Christina reviewed some of these in that roadmap that she took you on a walk on. So they're taking that DSFI, they're looking at community data, they're doing an inventory of their interventions, they're doing a gap analysis, they're looking at evidence-based practices, making data decision rules. All of these responsibilities have tangible actions that are already mapped out. So sometimes I think when we form these leadership teams, we think, now what? We've got everybody here. What are we going to do? But the great thing about the ISF process and using the DSFI is that it's all laid out for you for your first formation of your team. And then ongoing, you may add other topics to your agenda for that group, but there's a really clear roadmap for what you're going to talk about and what you're going to do. Okay, so now we're going to tell you a little story about a non-example of what this might look like. When we first started our wellness centers about 8 years ago, we had not heard of ISF. We were doing PBIS and we were working with districts who were doing PBIS. So that was our foundation. But we had very informal agreements with the districts that we worked with. And we had as needed leadership meetings between the district and the COE. So sometimes it was just sort of if an issue came up or there was no scheduled team that was meeting. There were referrals when there were crises and urgent needs that arose, but there was not a universal request for assistance. We used mostly school data to make decisions about what interventions we provided. We had a single source of funding, and sustainability was a late phase conversation. So lots of things that were not ISF that were happening. I promise some good things were still happening, but in terms of ISF, we had a lot of these systems that we hadn't built up yet. Okay, and so what it looks like when you're using expanded school data and community data. It's very common, and what we were sort of doing in the initial onset of our program was looking at academic achievement data, possibly graduation rates, discipline data, and attendance data. Expanded district data, which I think is relatively common now to look at, might include office discipline referrals, expanded attendance, such as like time out of class or nurse visits or wellness center visits. You might have a universal screener, and you might be using climate surveys like the California Healthy Kids Survey or student, staff, and family input. What ISF really adds a focus on, and maybe you've heard about this through your community schools work if your district or county is doing that, but we're also looking at things like demographic data for the school and neighborhood or community, socioeconomic status, free and reduced lunch rates, homelessness rates, incarceration, issues related to environmental changes and weather events, drug use, crisis center calls, suicide attempts, school and workplace violent incidents, and military deployment schedules. So we're going to kind of make this come to life and show how do we look at this and why might this matter. So here's a community data profile of Placer County. And you'll see on the left, there's just a demographic snapshot. On the right, there's social and economic factors. And at the bottom, there's community health and safety. All the data shows Placer County's stats as well as the comparison to California. So you'll see, for example, that we have a lot of strengths and protective factors for a lot of our students in our community. Our median household income is well above California's average. We have lower rates of poverty, lower rates of unemployment, lower rates of single parent households, lots of great things. There are two areas on here in particular that are really important to be looking at on a district community leadership team. One of them is the opioid-related ER visits. And I don't know if you can see there, but our numbers are almost 4 times as high as the state average. And then also our suicide rate. So the per 100,000, our rates are higher than the state average. So when a school community, when a DCLT is looking at this data, they need to think about how these numbers might be impacting their school community and what we might need to support. So an example of that would be in Placer, there, especially at our high schools, there was a tier 1 intervention, the One Pill Can Kill campaign around fentanyl. That was a big issue here, and some really scary incidents at our high schools happened around this. So they did a universal tier 1 campaign for that. And then also we offer Safe Talk, which is a 3-hour suicide prevention early intervention training. And you can even I think students as young as 15 can take this training. So those are 2 examples of something a school community, a DCLT, might decide to do when they're looking at that data and they see those 2 data points. These would be 2 examples of interventions that they might implement to support that data that they're seeing. Okay, and now Christina is going to take us through interventions.
Thanks, Ellie. Okay. So this is probably one of my favorite slides in this work that we've been doing, and it's also one of the most difficult shifts to make when thinking about ISF work, okay? This has to do with our mindsets. So what is typical in most organizations, or especially in education, that we identify student needs. So Ali just talked to you about how we can look at data. We're going to identify the needs of our students or our community. And what most often happens is that we jump right to a service. A service typically being a person or a place or a very broad level mystical term. For example, it could be that Johnny has been putting his head down a lot in class. We're going to send him to the wellness center. Or Johnny keeps tapping his pencil and blurting out all the time. We're going to send him to Miss Christina. And Miss Christina is going to do something. She's going to wave her magic wand and Johnny is going to be fixed. What did Miss Christina do? I'm not exactly sure. And maybe it worked and maybe it did not. Okay, so that is the difference between a service and an intervention, which we'll talk about in a moment. So oftentimes we jump straight from the need to the person, the place, or the mystical term of what it is that we might be doing. And then once we have identified that service, then that person, like me, Miss Christina, might be thinking about, okay, what am I going to do with Johnny? Am I going to pull some things from teacher pay teachers? I'm going to design this intervention to maybe help Johnny, but I'm doing that in a silo. I am doing that on my own. I am the holder of that information of what that intervention, evidence-based or not, is. And I'm not utilizing a team to get that holistic picture of all of Johnny's needs. Because as we know, Johnny might not just be struggling with some social emotional concerns. Maybe he's struggling to attend in class because there's a learning disability at play. And if I was working in the context of a team and evidence-based interventions, I might be a better attuned to that. So we're striving to shift from a needs to services to intervention model to this. We want to still use our data to identify student needs, but we want to then look at interventions. What are those evidence-based activities that we are doing to support those needs? And that we are looking at those interventions in the context of that integrated team. So that when we're looking at Johnny's data, we see his academic profile, his social emotional profile, his physical health profile, to determine what is that right intervention match that is hopefully evidence-based for that child. And then we can think about who is the appropriate person to serve that intervention. Who can do it, okay? So we want to move away from this and towards this. I'm going to pause for a second before I show you some examples of what that looks like. In the chat, can you just drop in there, why might this be hard? Why would that shift be hard? Think through the lens of your providers on your campuses. What makes this hard? There's no wrong answer here. I think I see some typing, but y'all are a quiet group. It's okay. All right, here we go. Lindsay, yes. Okay, we do not have a clear intervention inventory, just people who do interventions. Ah, yes, very common, right? And our people have expertise. We don't want to discount that. Like you're hiring great people and people are super important, but it's also very important to know what are our people doing? Because if magical Miss Christina leaves, I don't know what she was doing. So now I have to find a new person that hopefully can fulfill those same things, but they weren't based on intervention. So it's very difficult. Kirk says, as mentioned earlier, not everyone that is needed is at the table or on the DCLT. Yeah, great point. Okay, so we need to have the right people at the table having those conversations. Thank you, guys. A thing that always comes up for me is professional identity. Okay, so this is a hard shift because oftentimes as mental health clinicians, especially, we come into this work that we are the intervention, that we are the magic, and that's all that we need to say. End of story. And it's a difficult mindset shift to know that we need to be transparent about our interventions, that we do need to train others up on how to do these things, and that it's not just us. So that professional identity piece, not something to take lightly. We want to be really caring when we talk about that. All right, so some examples of what this looks like. All right, so again, the needs. We are identifying our student needs through data. So that could be through screening if you are already engaged in that. That could be through our nomination, which is our request for assistance. But remember, in ISF, it's that universal request for assistance. It's not just a mental health request for assistance or academic request for assistance. This is looking at all of those different aspects of a whole child. Or we might be using data decision rules, but something in the data that we're looking at tells us that there is a need. Then we meet in a team. The team determines which evidence-based interventions best fit that student identified needs. And we're going to look at our tiers, right? So based on data decision rules, what is that level of need? Are we looking at a group intervention, a more low dose intervention, or do we need to move towards more of an individualized tier 3 intervention? And with our evidence-based interventions, because we're talking interventions first, we have that criteria for how we're going to progress monitor over time. That's the other big piece. When we jump straight to a service, we know that Johnny's seeing Miss Christina, but we don't know how long. What is the course of that treatment? What does that look like? When we have an intervention, there's typically a scope and sequence to that work, and it is going to be time-bound in some way and based on data and ongoing progress monitoring. And then finally, think about who is the person that is qualified to provide that intervention. And also, very important, how might we pay for that? So when we're thinking about billing and other funding streams, if we need a specialist to provide that service, how are we going to do that? So that's what that cycle looks like. And here's an intervention example of that. So through a request for assistance process, a student is identified as needing an advanced tier intervention because the family has reported a history of traumatic experiences. And in addition to that, the teacher has observed and the student has self-reported experiences of emotional distress and intrusive thoughts. Okay, so we've got a pretty significant need here that popped up through that request for assistance process. And because we've already established that intervention inventory, we know that we have a trauma-focused intervention available, and that is our CBITS intervention. And so we know we can enroll that student in that intervention. We have a scope and sequence for that. We know how to progress monitor the CBITS intervention. And we know for this particular intervention, we do need a specialist. We do need that person with the letters behind their name because this is a trauma-focused intervention. And we can bill to those codes accordingly, depending on what funding mechanism you are working through. Okay, so that's a specialist example. But you might have an example like this. Oops, I went too fast. Through data, a group of students are identified as needing a Tier 2 social skills intervention, as indicated by behavior referrals and low scores on Tier 1 SEL curriculum outcome measurements in the areas of social skills and social problem solving. All right, so if you saw this data, what might typically happen next in your typical school site? We've got some kids that are struggling with social skills. What might be the typical response to that? Drop in the chat or unmute. That's fine too. Thank you, Luke. Yes, send them to the school counselor. Absolutely. Okay, put them in a group, Allie. Yes. Okay, that happens every day, over and over, rinse and repeat. And typically it's what Luke put first, like let's send them to the school counselor, or the school counselor has some groups going, let's do that, right? That happens a lot. We probably have 5 or 6 different types of friendship groups or social skills groups happening, sometimes effective, sometimes not, okay? But in this new way of thinking, now the team, the intervention team is going to come together and they're really going to think about what are those social skills needs? What is the data telling me? And do we have a specific intervention that's going to address those needs? And in this case, we do. We're looking at explicit social skill teaching, and we have this skill streaming intervention available through our intervention inventory. That has a clear scope and sequence. We have a way of progress monitoring, and there's self-report measures and teacher report measures embedded within that intervention. Here's the rub here, okay? We do not need a school counselor, a PPS, or a licensed clinician to provide that intervention, okay? Skill screaming can be taught by pretty much anyone on the school campus who has received a little training in that intervention. This could be run by our instructional assistant, or if we have counseling interns on campus, this could be run by a wide variety of professionals. It does not need to be that person with those letters behind their name and those people who are only qualified to do specific interventions. Because if Miss Christina is tied up with 5 different friendship groups, how is she going to run that trauma-focused CBT intervention because she's been flooded with this? So a big part of ISF is considering who is doing what and rethinking some of our roles. So this comes with that role clarification piece and really looking at the capacity of our staff to do what they need to do. And again, with that mindset shift, we need to change the way that we think about ourselves as professionals, especially if we are those mental health, behavioral health providers on school campuses. So at tier 1, instead of being the person that is pushing into the classroom every day and teaching those SEL lessons as we might do and also might love to do, we need to start thinking about ourselves as coaches and consultants. So how are we building up the capacity in others to be able to do those things to strengthen our tier 1 mental health and social emotional skills? And then at tier 2, same thing. How do we build up others who can be the facilitators of interventions that do not require licensed or credentialed humans to facilitate those small groups? So coaching and coordination could be our role at tier 2. And then, of course, at tier 3, we are the only people that are qualified to provide many of those interventions. So we're going to be able to guard that time as those direct service facilitators. So this is a mindset shift again. So instead of always being the person or people that do all of the things, starting to think about who is able to do what. And that starts with shifting to that needs to intervention model rather than jumping straight to the service, which is oftentimes a person. Is that tracking with everyone? Head nods. Yes, thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Got another non-example for you here, okay? So here was the makeup of one of our school districts in Placer County. So we had our wellness program happening, really functioning well, but they had their own wellness referral. So that was a referral that would come in and go to the wellness team and was primarily looking at just social, emotional, and mental health needs, okay? We had a tiered inventory of mental health interventions that we could utilize, and they were just mental health. So that was one silo happening on campus. Another silo happening was that we had all of these academic teams meeting. So we had an SST referral process, we had academic conferences happening, an SST team that was meeting regularly, we had math and reading intervention, and our special education assessment process route. Totally separate team, looking at different data points, meeting on a regular basis. And then we had our PBIS teams also working within an MTSS model, looking at data, but again, meeting separately, using different language, different referral pathways than those other two. And did I mention this is a single school district? So many of the people that are on these teams are on all of these teams, and yet we're speaking different languages, looking at different data, and have separate referral pathways. So if you've been tracking through this webinar, what is problematic about this model of support? Drop in the chat, or if you're brave, you can unmute. Why does this not work? Silos and inconsistency, yes. You got it, Brianna.
Christina, I would just add that the silos and then they're working parallel, but they're never integrating. So that
Yes, Lisa, and thank you for being brave to unmute. I love it.
Yes.
Yes, working in parallel, right? Yes, we are on the same campus. We are all here together, and yet there are these invisible walls between us, right? Fragmented systems is a big piece. No coordination of care, no communication. Yes, Leslie, exactly that. Okay. So we're not communicating with one another, but really when we have these fragmented systems, we are looking at children in slices. So when we meet in a team, I am only looking at Johnny's academics. I am only looking at Johnny's mental health and well-being, but not as a holistic picture. And oftentimes that will result in Johnny maybe receiving one type of intervention that might have not been the right intervention. And we might be wasting a lot of time in how to best serve Johnny because we missed it, because we didn't come together as a team. All right. So you hit some of these points here. What does this result in? Same individuals on multiple teams. This causes burnout, and this is no joke. We see this every day on our school campuses. We burn out fast. The more meetings we have, the more teams we go to, the more different types of processes, procedures, referral pathways that we have, people just want to throw their hands in the air. Siloed and multiple referral pathways cause confusion, not just for the staff on our campuses, but for families and for students. This is how those hallway referral conversations happen. I don't know which form I'm supposed to complete to get some help, so I'm going to grab Miss Christina in the hallway and I'm going to say, let me tell you all about this kid. And then something might happen, okay? We want to avoid that. We want to have that single referral pathway, one request for assistance process going to one team. And then finally, that siloed support system, that fractured view of student needs and inaccurate intervention match. That happens a ton. We're not correctly matching students to interventions because we only looked at that little slice of that kiddo rather than the whole picture. All right. So how did we resolve this at our example siloed school? So we started first and foremost by forming that district community leadership team. And that team involved the district superintendent, the administrator, our PCOE mental health staff that were embedded through the Wellness Center program, our family youth community liaison, and our mental health specialist. It also involved our special education teacher, our reading intervention teacher. So we had the academic lens, we had the school psychologist on there as well. So we wanted the full scope picture of our student needs. So academic, social, emotional, mental health, and importantly, executive leadership, because they are the decision makers. When we make systems changes, we need those people at the table. And we started by doing this. So this is a slightly blurry image of a very big spreadsheet. That is our intervention inventory. So this is where we laid all of our cards on the table and said, who is doing what? What are those things we're doing with kids when we take them out of their general education setting and to a room, either to go to a group or to some type of mental health intervention or academic intervention? And is it evidence-based? Do we know that it is actually effective? Do we have any way of monitoring the effectiveness of those interventions? The goal of this massive inventory is to identify, organize, align, and make explicit decisions on what we need to do next. Because oftentimes this will result in realizations that we have duplication happening, maybe we have ineffective interventions happening, maybe we have practices happening on campus that are not interventions at all, but we're spending a lot of time and resources on those things. And so we come together as a team to decide, do we need to continue these things, modify those interventions if there's overlap, and how do we know? So we're going to look at things like effectiveness, relevance, and fidelity of implementation. So really tightening up our structures around those interventions. We want to ensure that everything we're doing, for the most part, we have an outcome measurement, we have fidelity measures in place, and we have data decision rules. How do we know when to match students to an intervention? How do we know how to progress monitor? When do we know that kiddos are ready to exit that intervention so that they're not on that thing forever for all of eternity? So that's the intervention inventory. And that was probably one of the biggest lifts, but also had the greatest impact for this particular team. What they realized through that intervention inventory is that they had some gaps. They were missing some pretty essential interventions, and there were also some ineffective interventions in place that they wanted to look towards replacing or finding something new. One of those examples was the social emotional learning curriculum that this school team was using throughout their district. They did not have positive outcomes. First of all, they weren't measuring it well, but they also didn't see positive outcome indicators through use of that SEL curriculum. So what they wanted to do was come together as a team and explore potential adoption of a new SEL curriculum. But we need a process to do that. So just like with any academic curriculum, there's a whole process that we have to go through when we want to consider adopting a new academic curriculum, right? Why don't we do this for mental health and social emotional interventions? I don't know. If someone can tell me, please let me know. So we wanted to offer the hexagon tool as a potential process to help teams have an evidence-based way of really assessing what is the right fit intervention for our school and our community based on all of these indicators, thinking about things like capacity, fit, need, evidence, support, and usability. So this particular team was able to engage in that, and they, sure enough, decided to sunset their current SEL curriculum and adopt a new one, which they began launching this year. I spoke to you about data decision rules. So this is an example of what data decision rules look like for a particular intervention. And once they created their intervention inventory, a next big step was to create these data decision rules for the effective interventions that they plan to keep. So an example, one of these was the Resourceful Adolescent Program. So that's a small group intervention that does not need to be run by a mental health specialist. This is run by our family youth community liaisons who are not licensed people, but are often certified wellness coaches. And so essentially what this looks like is we want to clearly describe what that intervention is. What is our criteria used to determine when a student need is matched to that intervention? So how do we know? What data are we looking at that tell us this kiddo might be rising to the need of a tier 2 or tier 3 intervention and that this particular intervention might be the right fit? Then thinking about how we are monitoring progress for that intervention. We should have some type of assessment measures in place, ongoing progress monitoring measures so that we know how our kiddos are doing on interventions. And then the up. How do we know when our kiddo might need something new or something different, that this intervention is not effective? And most importantly, that we bring this back to the team. This is not a solo decision. Miss Christina is not just going to decide that Johnny's done with wrap A and we're just going to sunset that and not do anything else. We're going to bring this to the team, look at this data decision rule table together and decide, is there a different intervention that might be a great fit? And then finally, the out. How do we know when Johnny's ready to graduate from this intervention? Well, we have those data decision rules in place, so we know we have some set criteria that is aligned to that intervention to know that he has acquired those skills that we hoped for him to learn through this intervention. And we have a plan for generalizing those skills back out into the school and community setting. So this is an example of those in, up, on, and out data decision rules. Little emojis in the chat. So thumbs up if you already have something like this in place for the majority of interventions that you use at your school sites or through your programs. And thumbs down if you don't. Brianna, great. Okay, and I'm gonna do a no emoji. Maybe silence is the no. Okay. All right, so a couple of thumbs up. Others may be working on this, but this is an essential feature. Leslie says we really need a universal referral system and team coordination and follow up on progress or lack of progress. Yes, big thumbs up to that, okay? So that universal referral system, I have to say that's been the glue, probably the biggest game changer for most of our teams. If you can tighten that up and it leads to one integrated team, it's going to make all the difference. And that follow-up, yes. So sharing this out on a regular basis, are our kiddos making progress in the things that we're doing or lack thereof?
And Christina, I just want to
Yeah.
add too that some of what this does here, once you have the universal request, is it's you're more efficient because you've got the RFA, but you're also more efficient because you know what in, on, up, and out means. It's not the school counselor spending 20 minutes sharing how the student is doing and everybody kind of going off of their gut feeling about what works or not. And that can take up a lot of time, but it can also mean that based on our own biases, we give some kids another intervention and some kids not. So this really helps just make this a really clean process, and it's not as personal if we especially if a referral source is like, wait a second, why aren't you still seeing this kid, or why did you graduate them? The
Yes.
data makes the decisions, not us and just the vibes.
Yes. Thank you, Allie. Not just vibes, beyond the vibes for sure. And transparency. Okay. So another big piece of this is what are we doing, right? And oftentimes, especially in this particular climate, it's very important that we're transparent about the work that we're doing on school campuses and that our families know. As a parent, I really want to know, what is that intervention that my child is receiving? What does it look like? How did you match them to that intervention? How do you know that it's the right fit? This really helps with that transparency, and there is nothing to hide. We're doing good work. This is just a way to document that and have a really systematic process around it. All right, Leslie was speaking to this, okay? Our single system of delivery, that universal request for assistance. As I mentioned, on our non-example site to begin with that went through this process, they had that wellness referral, SST referrals, Swiss referrals, which is really about behaviors, but that's something different, and then speech referral pathways, academic intervention referrals. Oh my gosh. That school campus was so confused, frustrated, lack of trust in the process. There were many upset parents, like, I don't know how to get support for my kid. And kids were getting missed because oftentimes we were filling up with all of these groups that were not evidence-based. They were being sent to wellness. They were running a bunch of friendship groups and not leaning into our data because we didn't have this request for assistance process leading to that integrated team. So again, key message here that siloed referral pathways lead to siloed teams and prevent student access to that full continuum of supports. Okay, so these are just snapshot examples of what creating that universal request for assistance process can look like, because it's not just about creating a form, which I'll show an example of on the next slide, but it's really about this process. So how do we work together as a team to identify those kiddos? How do we train others on how to submit that request for assistance? We need to ensure that it is coming to a team who is looking at that information on a regular basis, and that intervention team is engaging in a process for looking at data collaboratively and making decisions, and that we are responsive when we receive those requests for assistance. That's that trust piece. The people that are asking for help need to know that they're going to receive support. And then that intervention team together decide on the appropriate match or fit, of course, then engaging the voice of the student and family in that process. It's not just us saying we're doing this to your kid. We're doing this with the student and with the family. And then finally, that referral feedback loop, that piece is really important too. Once we've matched a kiddo to an intervention, if it was that teacher making that request, that teacher needs to know what's going on, because they're going to also be a key player. They're going to be helping to generalize those skills back into the classroom once that intervention is up and rolling. I show this snapshot to say that this takes time. Every community's, oh, thanks, Leslie. Yes, I love it too. Every school community's process around that request for assistance is going to look a little bit different, but this is sort of the bare bones of it, and something, again, that we've created training content around to help you understand how to do this work. So all the things you're seeing are just sample snapshots that there is training and support available on how to implement any of these things. Here's an example of what an integrated request for assistance form looks like. Most will end up being some type of electronic form, because that is just where we are in this world. Who has paper forms anymore? But this is the paper version, so you can see what it looks like. But really here, looking at these buckets. So again, we are identifying academic strengths and needs, social, emotional, and behavioral. So holistic lens, going to an integrated team that all have those professional expertise and perspectives. Right. So in the end, our non-example site was able to move from a siloed wellness team model with those separated academics and PBIS buckets to this integrated, and they ended up calling their team their MTSS team that involved all of these key players, their mental health specialists, family youth community liaison, school psychologist, program specialist, administrator, academic intervention coordinator, and their speech and language pathologist as well. So an integrated team. A little quote from our family youth community liaison up in the corner. She said, "We are now collaborating and designing an intervention that captures the whole child." Our mental health specialist that was there as well. She has really loved engaging in this process and moving from this wellness team model to an integrated MTSS model. She said that she felt like she was just reporting out in those wellness team meetings. She was just sharing what they had already decided. They'd get a wellness referral, they would decide the intervention in isolation, and then they were just sharing out with the other individuals that were there. And this is a shift that now we're engaging as a team because everybody has their expertise. It's not just an I, it's moving from the I to the we. Okay. Here's a little evidence of success from that particular district and school site when they launched their integrated universal request for assistance process in the latter half of the last school year. They had 66 requests for assistance come in. And of those 66, 62 students were enrolled in Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. That's a 94% match to Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. And a lot of that is a testament to the training that happened around that. So it wasn't just a, here's a form, school community. It was a, let me train you on this form and this process. And let's have some things in place to ensure that this is actually a Tier 2 or Tier 3 need, not a Tier 1 need. And I feel like they did a really great job of that. So this was a successful, well-aligned process. They also realized through their ISF process that they had some gaps, as I mentioned before. And thankfully, also through CYBHI, there was an opportunity to engage in some training around some new interventions. So this particular district was able to engage in training around and adoption around 3 new evidence-based interventions. And the students that were enrolled in Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions experienced a 92% success rate, which is very high. And the fact that they had the data to actually say that. Because before it was more like a, I think they were successful or they're still on this intervention. So I'll tell you sometime next year after they've been on it for 2 years. And probably most importantly was that positive feedback from students, staff, families, and the school board. So there's a transparency around this work that is directly reported back up to all of our executive leadership and our school community. And there was a lot of thankfulness for this process, the clarity around it, the teaming and alignment, and the reduction in confusing referral pathways. So that was all really positive feedback from that school community. And you can see their little example of their flyer that they shared out to their schools as well. Again, just that transparency of information. We are integrating our systems. Here's the hard work that we're doing and the outcomes that we saw. So that's an example of a success story.
Okay, thanks, Christina, for sharing that. And, you know, the ISF process makes it really simple for you to find those data to share, whereas I think sometimes it can be really hard to even figure out what data do we have, what can we share. This becomes really clear when you do it ISF. So let's talk about next steps. We're almost to the end of our webinar here. If you are a BHSSA grantee, we highly encourage you to go back and talk with your teams about what you've learned today, share the recording when it comes out. This is a lot of information, and I had to hear about ISF several times before everything started to really click. So that is probably going to be your experience too, and that's okay. Christine and I are here to talk more about it. We can talk with you one-on-one so you can see how it applies to your work specifically. This roadmap gives you a lot of options for coaching and TA. If you think that some or all of this is the right fit for you and the teams that you're working on, there are several options to explore in terms of what TA you could receive. We're going to be doing a community of practice series that we'll do a Zoom poll here for in just a second that you can join, where we're going to talk about specific topics related to ISF. And then there's also individualized TA with targeted ISF activities for whatever makes sense for your project. So you can go through the whole roadmap with the DSFI all the way through to getting a universal screener and also doing an RFA, or you could just have a session on how to do the intervention inventory. And then there's also an option for Right Fit grantees to become an ISF trainer of trainers. So if you feel like your team, your county is in a spot where you want to learn about ISF, go through that, but then also be able to train districts in your community, that is an option for grantees as well. And we are happy to talk about any of these options with you. So Nikki, are you able to open the poll?
You got it.
Okay, so we are going to be offering a COP and we'd love to get your feedback on the topics. We also had a webinar a couple weeks ago and we pulled them there as well. So we're going to combine all of the results and then move forward with what COP topics we're going to go with. Christina, anything you want to add to that?
You explained it beautifully,
Okay,
Allie.
thank you.
Differentiation, menu of options, but this particular poll is to inform those COPs.
Okay, we've got 4 people who've responded so far. 5. I know a couple people on here today aren't grantees, but are joining to learn more about ISF. So it's okay if you don't fill out the poll. We won't wait for everyone to fill it out. Let's wait for a couple more people. Okay, thanks, Brianna.
I think that's actually, oh yeah, we're about halfway, but
Okay.
there are only 12 participants that aren't the 3 of us. So
Okay, totally. Yep, that makes sense. We'll just wait a little bit longer. Okay, Nikki, you can go ahead and close it, I think. Right. And so we'll compile those with the other results that we got, and we'll keep you posted on what topics we'll have for our COP. Okay. And then if you want to submit a TA request, you're welcome to do that or to contact us directly. Christina, if you wouldn't mind putting our email addresses in the chat. And we'll also you'll also see it on our slides. We have our contact info. So you're welcome to reach out to us directly or fill out a TA request form that you might see on the hub or that also comes out in Stack's emails. And also we can stay on for a few minutes if anyone has any questions or wants to chat further. Christina, anything else you want to add?
No, I think Nikki should be, or we should go forward to the feedback survey as well.
There we go.
There we go. We got our slides back up. So last but certainly not least, feedback survey. We always value your feedback and input, and we want to thank you so much for being here today. Don't hesitate to reach out, look at those options for support, and anything you need, we are here for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Lisa.